The moon was nothing more than a pale sliver hidden behind drifting clouds, casting shadows that made the Afghan mountains look like the jagged teeth of some ancient beast. The SEAL team moved silently along a narrow goat trail carved into the cliffs, their boots gripping loose shale that threatened to slide into the black ravine below. Every step was measured, every breath controlled, their night vision goggles casting the world in shades of eerie green. They had been dropped by helicopter hours earlier, far from their objective, and now the men were deep behind enemy lines. Their mission was clear: extract a high-value target from a small compound nestled in the valley, a warlord whose network had supplied explosives for dozens of deadly attacks. Capture him, get him out alive, and perhaps dozens of American and Afghan lives would be saved. The radio remained silent, the team leader, Lieutenant Harris, signaling with hand gestures rather than sound. Harris was a steady figure, the kind of leader who rarely raised his voice, but whose calm presence under pressure was enough to steel the nerves of even the greenest operator. Behind him moved Dawson, a broad-shouldered Texan who carried the squad's heavy machine gun, and then came Vega, the point man with instincts sharp as a wolf's. The rest followed in a tight column, rifles raised, eyes darting between the path ahead and the shadowed ridges above. Somewhere in those ridges they knew eyes were watching. The warlord's men knew this terrain better than anyone, and a quiet mountain could become a death trap in seconds. The compound appeared at last in the valley below, a cluster of mud brick walls with a faint glow of lanterns leaking through cracks. Harris gave the halt signal, and the team sank into the rocks like ghosts, weapons scanning. The plan was simple: breach before dawn, overwhelm the few guards, grab the target, and vanish before reinforcements could arrive. But even as Harris studied the compound through his scope, something felt off. Too quiet, too exposed, like bait left in the open. He whispered into the throat mic, his voice barely audible, eyes sharp, something's not right. The ambush erupted with terrifying suddenness. The night exploded in muzzle flashes as enemy fighters opened fire from three sides, the high ridges above vomiting streams of tracer rounds that carved through the darkness. The first burst slammed into the rocks around the SEALs, sending shards of stone flying like shrapnel. The team dove for cover, Dawson setting up the machine gun and unleashing a furious burst into the ridge line, the rattle echoing across the valley. Vega rolled into position, firing in controlled bursts, trying to suppress the enemy long enough for the others to move. But the truth was plain: they were pinned, surrounded, and hopelessly outnumbered. Contact left, contact right, contact high. Harris shouted, voice clipped but urgent. Bullets whined overhead, snapping into the dirt with deadly speed. The SEALs tried to maneuver, but every attempt to shift position was answered by withering fire from above. The enemy had them locked, herding them into a killing zone. One round caught Miller in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground with a cry of pain. Another round cracked against Dawson's helmet, denting it but leaving him alive by sheer luck. The radio crackled with static as Harris tried to call for support, but deep in the valley the signal was barely reaching. Reinforcements were hours away, time they did not have. The enemy closed in, voices echoing across the rocks, shouting in their native tongue. The SEALs fought with the ferocity of men who refused to surrender, each one covering the other, each second one with sweat and blood. Vega took down two fighters with precise shots before a grenade landed close, the blast hurling him against the rocks and leaving his ears ringing. The men knew the grim truth: if they were captured, death would be merciful compared to what awaited them. They would fight until their last round, until their last breath. It was then, at the darkest moment, when death seemed only seconds away, that the mountains roared with a new and unexpected fury. A single rifle shot cracked through the chaos, distinct, sharp, and deliberate. One of the enemy fighters on the ridge dropped instantly, a neat hole drilled through his skull. Before the others could react, another shot followed, then another, each one finding its mark with terrifying precision. Panic rippled through the ambushers as invisible death swept across their ranks. Harris froze, scanning through his goggles, but he couldn't find the source. The shots weren't coming from the SEALs, they were coming from somewhere high above, from a vantage point none of them had spotted. The sniper was unseen, but his presence was undeniable. Each pull of his trigger turned the tide a little more, thinning the ranks of fighters who moments earlier had the SEALs cornered. Men screamed as rounds punched through them, dropping them where they stood. Tracer fire turned upward as the enemy tried desperately to locate him, but their wild volleys only gave away their positions, and one by one they were cut down. Harris felt the shift, the sudden surge of hope in his chest as he realized someone out there, someone they hadn't known was even on this mountain, was fighting for them. The SEALs seized the chance. With the sniper raining precision death from above, Harris barked orders and the men moved with renewed aggression. Dawson's machine gun thundered again, tearing into the ridge line, while Vega, half-stunned from the blast, forced himself back into the fight, squeezing off rounds toward the retreating shadows. Miller, despite the pain of his wound, propped himself against a rock and laid suppressing fire with gritted teeth. Slowly, the ambush that had nearly annihilated them began to crumble. The enemy fighters, who had moments ago been poised to finish the job, now broke and scattered, terror-stricken by the invisible marksman who seemed to see them even in the pitch-black night. And still the sniper never missed. Every shot carried purpose, every target dropped cleanly, until the last of the enemy melted into the darkness, their shouts fading into silence. The SEALs remained in cover, breathing hard, hearts pounding, unable to fully grasp the miracle that had just unfolded. Harris scanned the ridge lines, trying to spot the mysterious savior, but there was nothing, only the empty mountains silent once more. Whoever he was, he had disappeared as swiftly as he had arrived. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rasp of strained breathing and the metallic clicks of weapons being reloaded. Harris finally whispered, almost to himself, "We're still alive." It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was survival when survival had seemed impossible. The men looked at each other, their eyes wide, sweat and dust streaking their faces. None of them had expected to see the dawn, but thanks to a hidden guardian in the mountains, they had been given another chance. And though they didn't yet know who he was or why he had chosen to intervene, every man among them knew one truth with absolute certainty. They owed their lives to a ghost with a rifle. The ridge line was still smoldering with gunpowder and the acrid sting of explosives when Harris finally motioned for the men to regroup. They crept closer together in the shelter of the rocks, every breath visible in the cold mountain air. Miller's shoulder wound was bad, the fabric of his uniform soaked dark with blood, but he managed to hold his rifle steady, refusing to be a burden. Dawson knelt beside him, muttering through clenched teeth as he wrapped a bandage around the torn flesh, his big hands working with surprising gentleness for a man who had just unleashed hell with a machine gun. Vega shook the ringing from his ears, the aftershock of the grenade still buzzing in his skull, but his eyes were sharp again, scanning every ridge, every shadow, as though expecting another wave of fighters at any second. "Who the hell was that?" Dawson asked finally, voice low but heavy with awe. He didn't look up from Miller, but the question hung in the air like a challenge. Harris didn't answer immediately. He studied the slopes above through his scope, sweeping across jagged ridges and boulders that loomed like watchtowers in the night. There was no sign of movement, no glint of a scope, no silhouette against the stars. Whoever had saved them was gone, as though swallowed by the mountain itself. "I don't know," Harris admitted. "But without him we'd be dead. That's all that matters right now." They couldn't afford to linger. The enemy would regroup, maybe bring reinforcements, and the longer the SEALs stayed in the valley, the greater the chance of being cut off completely. Harris gave the order to move, and with quiet discipline, the men lifted their gear and pressed onward, climbing higher along a goat trail that twisted into the mountain. Miller staggered at first, but Vega slung an arm under his shoulder and half carried him up the path, their boots crunching against loose stone. Every man carried the same thought in his head but none spoke it aloud. If the sniper was still out there, would he follow? The higher they climbed, the colder it became. Thin air stung their lungs and the silence pressed heavier than before. For a long stretch, nothing happened. No gunfire, no movement, only the crunch of boots and the steady hum of nerves stretched too tight. Harris kept scanning the ridges, unable to shake the sense of being watched. It wasn't the same dread as before though, it felt different now, like a guardian's gaze rather than a predator's. Still, it gnawed at him because SEALs didn't like mysteries and this one was as dangerous as it was miraculous. 2 hours later, they reached a narrow plateau that overlooked the valley. Harris called for a halt, and the team sank into defensive positions, setting up a tight perimeter. They needed rest, needed to patch Miller properly, needed to rethink the mission. But as they settled, Vega froze, raising a fist to signal silence. He pointed toward the opposite ridge. Harris lifted his scope and held his breath. For the briefest second he caught it, a flicker of movement, a human silhouette against the sky, motionless and precise, watching them from the rocks. Then it was gone. "Sniper," Vega whispered. "He's still here." The men exchanged uneasy looks. Relief mixed with tension, like knowing the storm that had saved you could also strike you down. Harris lowered his scope slowly. Whoever this man was, he had the skill of a ghost. The enemy hadn't spotted him, but Vega had, and Harris himself had only barely caught the glimpse. That kind of discipline, that kind of invisibility wasn't ordinary. The hours dragged into the gray edge of dawn. Miller dozed fitfully, wincing with every movement, while Dawson kept his machine gun angled toward the valley, daring anything to come back up. Vega cleaned his rifle in silence, eyes darting to the ridges between strokes. Harris sat apart, radio in hand, trying again to reach command. The static was still heavy, the mountains blocking their signal, but a faint voice finally cracked through. He passed coordinates, requested medevac for Miller if possible, and reported hostile contact. He left out the sniper. Command didn't need mysteries clouding their judgment, not yet. By sunrise, the light revealed the battlefield below. From their perch, the SEALs could see bodies scattered across the rocks, enemy fighters sprawled in unnatural angles where the hidden sniper had struck. Harris studied the pattern and his breath caught. These weren't lucky shots. Every target had been taken with surgical precision, head, throat, heart. The kind of accuracy that only came from years of training, from a mind that measured wind, distance, and time within human calm. Whoever this ghost was, he wasn't some wandering villager or rogue mercenary. He was a professional as skilled as any of them, maybe more. They pressed on before noon, cutting across jagged terrain toward their original objective. The compound was still out there, the warlord still waiting, and Harris couldn't abandon the mission unless command ordered him to. They moved cautiously, every ridge a possible ambush, every shadow a threat. But with every mile, the same strange pattern repeated itself. Enemy fighters appeared in small groups, tracking them, moving to intercept, and every time before the SEALs were even engaged, a rifle cracked from somewhere unseen and the enemy fell. Sometimes it was one man, sometimes three, sometimes more, but always the same, precise, clinical, devastating. The sniper was clearing their path whether they asked him to or not. It unsettled the team more than it comforted them. Soldiers liked to know their allies, to trust the man covering their flank, to look him in the eye. This was different. This was war with a ghost at their side, a phantom who killed for them without a word, without revealing his name, his face, or even his allegiance. They whispered theories during brief halts, maybe CIA, maybe a NATO marksman gone rogue, maybe even a local with a vendetta against the warlord. None of the answers felt right. Harris listened but offered no theory. Deep inside, he feared the truth. If this sniper was that good and he wasn't theirs, then what stopped him from turning his sights on them once the mission ended? By late afternoon, they reached a cliff overlooking the warlord's compound. The sun hung low, painting the mud walls in gold, shadows stretching long across the valley floor. Harris studied the layout carefully through his scope, marking guard positions, counting rifles. The place was crawling with fighters, far more than intelligence had reported. A frontal assault would be suicide. They needed stealth, speed, and a miracle. And then, as if summoned, the miracle whispered again through the air. Harris flinched as a guard on the compound wall dropped silently, a neat hole in his temple. Another followed seconds later, collapsing before anyone noticed. The sniper was here. He was already thinning the defenses, opening gaps where there had been none. Harris's pulse quickened. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just following them anymore, he was working the mission alongside them. For the first time since the ambush, Harris allowed himself a grim smile. They weren't alone. They had a phantom ally, a guardian who moved unseen, and as unnerving as it was, Harris knew one truth he couldn't deny. If they had any chance of pulling this mission off, it would be because of the man in the mountains with the rifle. The compound sat like a fortress of clay and shadow, its mud brick walls rising from the valley floor with a defiant stubbornness that spoke of centuries of warlords before the current one. The SEALs lay prone on the ridge above, watching through scopes, counting patterns, waiting for the right moment. Harris traced the guard rotations with calm precision, but his mind couldn't shake the unease of the unseen ally. Each time a sentry toppled silently from a distant shot, the plan shifted, opportunities widening where there had been none. Whoever the sniper was, he was dismantling the compound's defenses piece by piece, as though he already knew exactly what the SEALs needed. The men whispered only when necessary. Dawson muttered, "He's clearing us a path, sir. Like he's reading our playbook." Vega, ever the skeptic, shook his head. "Or like he's hurting us. Don't forget, we don't know whose side he's on." Harris let the words hang in the cold air. Both men were right. It felt like help, but too perfect, too orchestrated. Still, hesitation wasn't an option. Miller's wound had slowed them, and reinforcements would return to the valley soon. If they were going to strike, it had to be now. The first breach came at dusk. The team slipped down the ridge, shadows stretching long, boots muffled by dirt and sand. Harris led them to the east wall where the sniper had already opened a hole in the defense by dropping the lone sentry station there. Dawson boosted Vega up first, his lean frame scaling the wall with cat-like precision. A rope followed and one by one, the SEALs slid silently into the courtyard. The smell of smoke and goat hides hit them, mingled with the faint aroma of spiced food still lingering from the evening meal. Children's toys lay scattered near a corner, a sobering reminder that in this war zone, innocence always stood too close to violence. They moved quickly, clearing small outbuildings, securing paths to the central hall where intelligence reported the warlord resided. The sniper's presence was felt but unseen. Each time they encountered resistance, a single shot cracked from afar, dropping an enemy before he could raise the alarm. Harris began timing his movements with those shots, as though an invisible partner was syncing perfectly with him. It was unnerving but effective, the kind of rhythm soldiers trusted in battle, even if it came from a ghost. Inside the hall, lanterns cast flickering light on rugs and cushions spread across the floor. The warlord sat cross-legged, his thick beard stained with tea, surrounded by armed guards. Harris froze them with a single flashbang, the blinding burst throwing men into chaos. The SEALs stormed in, swift and violent, rifles barking with precision. Vega took down 2 guards in seconds, Dawson another with a roar of gunfire. Harris rushed the warlord, pinning him before he could flee, binding his wrists with zip ties. The man cursed in his language, thrashing, but Harris silenced him with a knee pressed firm against his spine. Mission success was in their grasp. But then the mountain roared again, not with the sniper's precise shots but with the thunder of dozens of rifles. The outer walls erupted in gunfire, rounds punching through clay, splintering wood. Reinforcements had arrived, pouring into the compound from trucks that had rumbled unseen into the valley. The SEALs were suddenly the ones trapped inside. Dust filled the hall as bullets tore chunks from the walls, the warlord howling beneath Harris as the men dove for cover. "We're boxed in." Dawson shouted over the chaos, his machine gun rattling as he laid down suppressive fire through a shattered doorway. Vega darted to a window, returned fire, then hissed, "Dozens of them, maybe more. We won't hold long." Harris scanned the exits, mind racing. The mission was complete, the target in custody, but escape was slipping into impossibility. Then, just as despair threatened, that same familiar crack split the night. A fighter outside dropped instantly, then another, then another. The sniper was there, firing at a punishing pace, his rounds weaving death through the reinforcements as though he alone could hold the tide. The SEALs moved with renewed urgency, matching his rhythm again, every window and doorway spitting lead in coordination with the ghost above. Still the enemy pressed hard. They poured into the courtyard, climbing walls, screaming war cries. Dawson's machine gun blazed, mowing down clusters, but his ammo was dwindling fast. Vega took a grazing wound along his arm, gritting his teeth as blood soaked his sleeve. Harris barked commands, voice like steel, forcing calm into chaos. "Hold the line. Keep that warlord breathing. We fight our way out or we die here." The men answered with fire and fury, every shot a defiance against the impossible odds. Minutes felt like hours. The compound became a furnace of dust and noise, the walls trembling under relentless assault. Yet the sniper never faltered. His bullets fell like a storm from the heavens, unrelenting, each strike precise. Fighters who thought they had flanked the SEALs dropped before they even raised their rifles. Trucks that tried to push closer were disabled with clean shots through their drivers. Whoever he was, he fought as though his life depended on theirs, as if the mountain itself had sworn to protect them. At last Harris saw a sliver of hope. Through the haze of dust and smoke, he spotted a gap forming on the western wall where the sniper's barrage had cleared a path. "There," he shouted. "West wall, move now." The SEALs surged as one, dragging the bound warlord between them, Miller staggering but determined, Vega covering the rear with fierce bursts. They crashed through the broken wall into the night air, scrambling over debris as bullets chased them like angry hornets. The sniper's fire shifted instantly, cutting down pursuers, guiding them like shepherd's dogs toward the open slopes beyond. They ran until their lungs burned, until their legs threatened collapse. The warlord dragged mercilessly through dirt and stone. When at last they collapsed into the shadow of another ridge, hearts hammering, the gunfire faded behind them. Silence crept back into the mountains, heavy, absolute. The warlord lay bound and defeated, glaring hatred at his captors, but alive. The SEALs, battered and bloodied, had done the impossible. And as they caught their breath, Harris turned his gaze upward, searching the ridges. He didn't need to see the sniper to know he was there. Somewhere in the dark, their phantom had once again decided their fate, pulling them from certain death with invisible hands. Harris clenched his fists, gratitude and unease warring inside him. This wasn't luck. This was intention. Someone had chosen them, fought for them, and saved them again and again. But why? Until he had answers, Harris knew one thing with certainty. Whatever game they were now part of, the ghost in the mountains held the rules. The ridge swallowed them whole, shadows wrapping around the exhausted men as they collapsed into its rocky arms. The night had grown colder, the kind of mountain chill that seeped through gear and bone alike, but none of the SEALs cared. Their chests heaved like bellows, throats raw from dust and smoke. The warlord writhed where they had dumped him, his wrists bound tight, his curses filling the air with venom. Dawson silenced him with a sharp tap from his rifle but, leaving the man groaning in the dirt. The team needed silence now. Silence and a plan. Harris knelt with his map unfolded across a flat stone, tracing their position with a gloved finger under the pale glow of a red lens light. The extraction point was still miles away, far across unforgiving ridges and valleys now crawling with enemy fighters alerted by the compound battle. They had their target, but getting him out was a challenge they might not survive. Miller sat nearby, pale from blood loss, his shoulder bandage soaked through again. Vega, arm wrapped with a crude dressing, sharpened his focus by cleaning his rifle with steady hands, the rhythmic motion a way to push back pain. Dawson fed bullets into an empty belt, jaw clenched as he counted the dwindling rounds. They were low on everything, ammo, medical supplies, time. "We move at first light," Harris said, voice firm though fatigue dragged at him. "We cut west toward the canyon. It's rough terrain but it'll keep us off the main trails. Extraction's there." He didn't add what they all knew. If reinforcements boxed them in before then, the mission would end here. Vega's eyes lifted, scanning the black ridges above. "What about him?" he asked quietly. No one needed clarification. Harris followed his gaze, heart tightening. The sniper. The ghost. The man who had chosen to fight for them. Harris still hadn't seen him clearly, but he had no doubt he was up there now, watching, guarding, maybe even listening to their words on the cold wind. "He's not our problem," Harris answered after a pause. "We can't rely on someone we don't know. We trust each other, that's all." Yet the words felt hollow even as he spoke them, because deep down he knew the truth. Their survival until now was tied to that unseen rifleman. And if he disappeared, the odds shifted back to certain death. Dawn crept slowly, bleeding gray light into the sky, and with it came the dread of movement. The SEALs rose stiffly, shouldering their packs, hauling the bound warlord to his feet. The man stumbled and spat curses, but Vega shoved him forward, rifle pressed to his back. The path westward climbed steep and unforgiving, winding between jagged rocks that turned every step into a battle. Miller gritted his teeth, refusing to slow them down, though every stumble sent fire through his wound. The men moved in silence, only the crunch of boots and the rasp of labored breath breaking the air. Halfway up the slope, Vega hissed a warning. Shapes moved along the far ridge, dark silhouettes against the rising sun. Fighters, scouts or hunters, maybe 20 strong, rifles slung, searching. Harris signaled the team down into cover, hearts thudding. They couldn't risk a firefight here. Ammo was too precious. The warlord sneered, sensing the danger, his lips curling into a cruel smile. And then it began again. The sharp, precise cracks of a rifle echoed from somewhere unseen, and the figures on the ridge toppled one by one, as though plucked by invisible fingers. No panic, no wild volleys this time, just clean execution, the work of a professional. In less than a minute, silence returned. The ridge was still. The sniper had saved them again without asking, without revealing, a phantom guardian clearing their path as if the mountains themselves had chosen sides. The team moved faster after that, spurred by adrenaline and unease. The warlord muttered angrily in his language, sneering each time another enemy fell, as though mocking them for relying on an unseen ally. Dawson jabbed him forward with a growl, muttering under his breath about how much easier things would be if they didn't need him alive. But orders were orders, and Harris kept them sharp. By midday the sun burned high, baking the ridges, forcing sweat into eyes and grit into mouths. The SEALs paused under a rock overhang, stealing precious minutes of rest. Harris studied the map again, eyes narrowing. They were close to the canyon now, but the approach was exposed. If the enemy had guessed their path, they'd be waiting. He chewed the inside of his cheek, weighing options, when Vega spoke low beside him. "You know he's leading us, right?" Harris looked up sharply. "What?" "The sniper," Vega said. "He's not just helping. He's shaping our route. Clearing here, covering there. It's not coincidence. He's driving us somewhere." The words burrowed into Harris's mind, unwelcome but undeniable. He had thought it too, though he hadn't dared voice it. Their rescues had been too perfect, too timely, too orchestrated. Was the ghost herding them like sheep? So, to what end? Harris didn't answer, just folded the map tight and barked orders to move. Dwelling on questions in the field was death. They'd deal with answers later, if later came. The canyon yawned before them by late afternoon, its walls rising sheer on both sides, a jagged scar carved through the mountain. The extraction point lay beyond, but the passage was a funnel, perfect for ambush. Harris's gut churned. He signaled the men to slow, rifles raised, eyes darting. The warlord chuckled under his breath as if savoring their tension. And then the first shot rang, not from the sniper but from ahead. Bullets sparked off stone, and fighters appeared on the cliffs, pouring fire down into the canyon. The SEALs dove for cover, rocks shattering, dust choking the air. Dawson unleashed the machine gun in roaring bursts, Miller firing one-handed despite the pain, Vega snapping shots with deadly precision. But they were pinned again, trapped in a stone throat with death raining from above. Harris cursed, every instinct screaming that this was the end. And then, crack, 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 the ghost spoke again. The sniper's rounds sliced through the ambushers, dropping them clean from the cliffs. Chaos erupted above as enemy fighters panicked, unable to locate him, their fire faltering under his merciless assault. The SEALs pressed forward under the cover of his storm. They sprinted from rock to rock, dragging the warlord, shouting over gunfire. The canyon became a killing field, not for them but for the men who had thought to trap them. Bodies tumbled from ledges, rifles clattering into the dust. Within minutes, the firing thinned, then died entirely. Silence pressed down, broken only by the ragged breaths of the SEALs as they collapsed into cover near the far end. Harris scanned the cliffs, sweat stinging his eyes. He needed, to see the man who had done this, to know his face. But the ridges gave nothing back. Only empty rock, shadow, and the haunting certainty that the ghost was still watching. They were alive again, not by their own strength alone, but by the hand of someone who refused to reveal himself. Harris clenched his fists around his rifle, torn between gratitude and suspicion. They had their warlord. They had their path. But as he looked at the men beside him, wounded, exhausted, hanging on by willpower, he knew the truth. They weren't surviving this mission alone. And until they met the sniper, until they understood his purpose, they weren't in control at all. The canyon emptied into a wide plateau where the wind howled freely, carrying dust and grit that stung the eyes. The SEALs staggered forward, every muscle screaming, every nerve stretched raw. The warlord stumbled between them, bound and glaring, his hatred undimmed despite the beatings and exhaustion. Harris pushed the pace, though his legs ached with every step. They were close, closer than they had any right to be after the gauntlet they'd survived. Yet with each mile, Harris felt the weight of the unseen more than the weight of the warlord. The sniper had saved them again and again, but the question gnawed at him. Why hadn't he shown himself? They halted at a dry ravine as the sun dipped low, shadows lengthening. Harris signaled for perimeter positions. Dawson dropped heavily beside a boulder, feeding the last rounds into his machine gun. Vega crouched low, eyes sharp, sweeping the ridge line with suspicion. Miller slumped against the rocks, pale as chalk, fighting to stay conscious. The air was heavy with fatigue, but no one dared close their eyes. That was when Harris felt it, the prickling at the back of his neck, the sensation of eyes fixed on him. He raised his rifle, scanning the slope above. And there he was. For the first time the ghost revealed himself. A lone figure stood on the ridge, silhouetted against the fading sun. He wore desert camouflage faded almost to gray, blending into stone. A hood was pulled low, a scarf covering his face, leaving only his eyes visible, cold, steady, unblinking. A massive rifle rested in his hands, its barrel long and scarred, a weapon built for one purpose: absolute precision. The SEALs froze, every man's rifle snapping upward. But the figure didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't raise his weapon. He simply stood, watching them with the stillness of stone. Harris held his breath, finger taut on the trigger. His instincts screamed caution, but something deeper urged restraint. This was the man who had saved them over and over. Killing him now felt like spitting in the face of fate itself. Slowly Harris lowered his rifle. The others followed his lead, though unease buzzed through them. The sniper tilted his head as though acknowledging the gesture, then descended the slope with measured steps. Dust rose with each stride, his approach unhurried, unthreatening, but deliberate. When he reached them, he stopped just outside of easy range, close enough for his eyes to burn into theirs. "Who the hell are you?" Dawson demanded, voice raw, hand still twitching near the trigger. The man said nothing. His gaze swept over each SEAL, pausing briefly on the wounded Miller, then on the bound warlord who snarled and spat at him. At last, the sniper lowered his rifle and slid the scarf from his face. He was young, too young, Harris thought at first glance. His face was sharp, angular, with the hardened lines of someone who had lived more war than his years should allow. His eyes, though, were the most striking, gray as storm clouds, carrying the kind of weight that only comes from burying too many ghosts. "I was here before you," he said at last, his voice calm, quiet but carrying. "And I'll be here long after." The words hung heavy in the silence. Vega frowned. "You've been following us. Guiding us. Keeping you alive," the sniper replied simply. He looked at Harris. "And keeping him alive." His head jerked toward the warlord, whose sneer faltered for the first time. Harris narrowed his eyes. "You could have let us die back there," Harris said carefully. "You didn't? Why?" The sniper's expression didn't change. "Because I need him taken out of these mountains. Alive. The same as you." The SEALs exchanged tense glances. The coincidence was too sharp, too perfect. Harris's gut twisted. "How do you know our mission parameters?" The sniper stepped closer, and Harris caught the faint marks of old unit patches stripped from his uniform. The realization hit him like a blow. This man had once worn a uniform, not Taliban, not militia, but Western. American. NATO? The silence grew taut until the sniper broke it himself. "I used to wear the same flag you do," he said quietly. "But I was left here. Written off. Forgotten." His eyes hardened, voice laced with old bitterness. "So I became something else. A ghost. And I kill men like him because no one else will." He nodded again at the warlord, whose eyes darted with sudden recognition and unease. The truth slammed into Harris with brutal clarity. This wasn't just a rogue marksman. This was a soldier, one of theirs or someone close enough, abandoned to these mountains, surviving by the scope and the rifle, carving his own war in the shadows. Dawson shifted uncomfortably. "So what, you've been fighting your own private war out here?" The sniper's gaze cut to him like a blade. "It's not private when the blood spills into every village, every road, every family caught between men like him and the ones who arm them." His voice was cold steel, steady but burning with conviction. Harris weighed the moment, heart pounding. This man had saved them, yes. But he was unpredictable, a variable in a mission that had no room for them. And yet, without him, they'd be dead already. The men looked to Harris for a decision. Finally Harris spoke, voice low but steady. "We finish the mission. We take the warlord out. If you want to help, then you move with us until extraction. But if you try to take control, if you jeopardize my men, I'll put you down myself." The sniper studied him for a long silent moment. Then slowly he nodded once. "Fair." He slung his rifle over his shoulder and moved closer, not as an enemy, not quite as an ally, but as something in between. The SEALs eased, though tension lingered like a taut wire ready to snap. Vega muttered, "Hell of a guardian angel we've got." Dawson grunted, "More like a devil with good aim." But as the ghost settled among them, silent and watchful, Harris felt the balance shift again. The mission was still theirs, the burden still theirs, but now, in the shadows beside them, walked a man who blurred the line between savior and threat. And whether he meant it or not, the moment he revealed his face, their fates had entwined. The warlord glared at the sniper with venom, his eyes wide with something more than hatred, fear. Harris caught it and it struck him hard. Whoever this ghost was, he wasn't just another abandoned soldier. He was something far more dangerous, far more personal. And though Harris didn't yet know the story, he knew one thing: the warlord recognized him. That realization chilled Harris more than the mountain wind ever could. Night fell heavy across the plateau, bringing with it a cold that bit deep through uniforms and bone. The SEALs clustered low around a meager fireless camp, their breaths fogging faintly in the moonlight. Shadows clung to the canyon walls, and every sound carried too far. Harris crouched with his rifle across his knees, eyes never straying from the ghost who now sat a short distance away, silent as stone. The sniper had joined them, but he hadn't relaxed. He watched with the same predatory stillness, hands folded over his long rifle, his gray eyes lit dimly by the moon. The warlord shifted constantly in his bindings, sneering and muttering curses under his breath. Yet Harris noticed something he couldn't ignore. Every time the ghost shifted his gaze, the warlord's bravado cracked. His lips tightened, his eyes darted away, and for a flicker of a moment, fear bled through. Harris finally broke the silence. "You know him," he said quietly, voice carrying across the small space. The ghost didn't answer. Miller stirred weakly, wrapped in his jacket, his face pale but his ears straining. Dawson glanced up from cleaning his weapon, suspicion narrowing his eyes. "He damn sure knows him," Dawson muttered. "I've never seen a warlord look like he's seen a ghost, but that's exactly what's happening." Vega leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Talk," he said to the sniper. "We deserve to know what we're walking with." The ghost's gray eyes flicked from one SEAL to the next. For a long moment, it seemed he wouldn't speak. But then his voice came low, flat, as if each word was dragged from a grave. "Years ago, before any of you set foot in these mountains, I was part of a task force sent to dismantle him." He jerked his chin toward the warlord. He wasn't just another militia commander then. He was climbing fast, consolidating villages, buying loyalty with stolen aid money and blood. We were ordered to cut him off before he became untouchable. The SEALs leaned in despite themselves. The ghost continued, eyes far away now. "We hit one of his compounds, midnight raid. Intel was bad. He knew we were coming. It was an ambush. I lost my entire team in that valley, good men, brothers. We fought for hours, calling for extraction that never came. I held the last line while the rest bled out. When the smoke cleared, I was the only one still breathing." His hands flexed unconsciously against the rifle. "Command wrote us off as Kia. They never came back. They never looked." His voice hardened, though his face stayed carved from stone. "I stayed alive by learning the land better than he ever could. And I swore I would make him feel every loss, every ghost he gave me. I've hunted him ever since. Every convoy he sent, I broke. Every outpost he built, I ruined. I turned his men into corpses one by one. I made him believe the mountains themselves hated him. That's why he fears me. Because to him, I am the dead who never stayed dead." The warlord's face twisted in fury, but his eyes betrayed him. His breath grew quick, shallow. He spat at the sniper's feet. "You are nothing," he hissed, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him further. Dawson swore softly under his breath. Vega muttered, "Jesus." Harris studied the ghost, piecing together fragments. Abandoned. Forgotten. A soldier turned revenant, waging a one-man war. It was madness, but it was also the only reason the SEALs had made it this far. Still, Harris's instinct screamed caution. A man like this didn't bend easily. "You've been fighting alone," Harris said carefully. "And now you want us to finish what you started." The ghost's gaze locked on him. "I don't care about your mission. I care about him leaving these mountains alive. Because alive, he faces what waits beyond. Alive, he feels justice burn slower than death ever could." His words cut like a blade, steady and fierce. "If you were just here to kill him, I'd have done it myself weeks ago." The SEALs let the silence hang heavy. Miller finally rasped, his voice weak but cutting. "Then why save us? You could have just taken him when we were pinned back there." The ghost's expression shifted just slightly, softer for the briefest breath. "Because your mission means he won't vanish into a cave with new men and new weapons. It means an end. And I needed to see if you were strong enough to drag him out." His eyes flicked to Harris. "You're close. Don't fail." Harris absorbed the words, the warning, the weight of a man who'd burned his soul in war. He looked at his men, battered but unbroken, and at the warlord who glared but trembled beneath the surface. He realized the ghost wasn't just part of their story now, he was the story. The warlord wasn't afraid of the SEALs, wasn't afraid of capture. He was afraid of facing the thing he had created by slaughtering that lost team. The night stretched long, filled with watch shifts and silence. But Harris couldn't sleep, not with the ghost so close, not with the warlord's fear gnawing at his mind. He replayed the sniper's words again and again, trying to decide if this man was ally or a curse stitched to their mission. One thing was certain. The mountains had shaped him into something that wasn't quite soldier anymore. He was sharpened into a weapon forged from grief, vengeance, and patience beyond imagining. As dawn bled across the sky, Harris made his decision. They would move together. Whatever ghosts haunted this man, they would have to carry them until extraction. But deep inside, Harris felt the rippling dread that their mission had shifted. It was no longer just about taking the warlord out of the mountains, it was about surviving the company of the phantom who had revealed himself too late to turn away. The warlord met Harris's gaze that morning, eyes wide with venom but also with pleading, as though begging him to understand. Harris didn't reply. He just tightened his grip on his rifle and signaled the men to move. Because whether they walked beside a savior or a monster, the path forward was the same, and every step brought them closer to a reckoning none of them were prepared for. The mountains narrowed again into a choke point of black stone, jagged ridges tearing the sky. The SEALs moved in single file, boots crunching gravel, rifles at the ready. The warlord stumbled between Dawson and Vega, bound hands raw from rope burns, his breath ragged. Miller limped at the rear, pale but stubborn, refusing help though his wounds slowed him. And always, just ahead, the ghost moved like a shadow, rifle across his back, steps silent, eyes scanning every ridge as if he knew the land more intimately than breath itself. The morning had begun with silence, but tension weighed every step. Harris could feel it in his men. Dawson's distrust simmered openly, the way his gaze never left the sniper's back. Vega's suspicion burned quieter but sharper, his questions unspoken but pressing. Even Miller, usually steady, watched the ghost with unease whenever his strength allowed. They had all heard his story, all seen the cracks of something deeper, darker. And though the man had saved them, though he now walked with them, none could shake the feeling that they were carrying not one prisoner, but two, the warlord bound by rope and the ghost bound by vengeance. By midday the sun hammered down, turning the canyon into a furnace. Harris signaled for a halt beneath a sliver of shade. The men sank down, drinking in silence, conserving what little energy they had left. The warlord sat heavily, eyes darting, lips curling into a sneer. He turned his gaze on the sniper and finally let out a rasp of laughter. "You see," the warlord hissed, his voice cracked but cruel. "Even they do not trust you. They feel it. They know what you are." His words slithered through the heat, poison aimed at the heart of the group. The sniper didn't react, didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on the ridgeline, scanning, detached. But Harris caught the faint twitch of his jaw. Dawson spat in the dirt. "He's not wrong. You've been guiding us, sure. Saving our asses. But why? You want him alive, fine. But what happens when we hand him over and you decide that's not enough?" The ghost finally turned, his voice flat, steady. "If I wanted him dead, he'd already be a corpse. If I wanted you dead, none of you would have made it past the first ambush. Stop wasting breath questioning what I haven't done." The sharpness in his tone drew silence, but not peace. Vega leaned forward, his eyes narrow. "You've been alone out here too long. Men like you, men who lose everything, they don't come back clean. So tell me straight. When this is over, when we're at extraction, are we leaving the mountains with you, or are we leaving you behind?" The sniper met Vega's stare, and for a long moment the air seemed to freeze. Then he said quietly, "I never planned on leaving." The words sank like stones in the gut of every man there. Harris felt the chill despite the heat. Before he could reply, the crack of a rifle echoed through the canyon. The first round sparked off the rocks inches from Vega's head. The second slammed into the dirt near Dawson's boots. The seals exploded into motion, dragging the warlord down, returning fire toward the ridge. Harris shouted orders, his voice steady despite the thunder in his chest. "Contact North Ridge. Suppressing fire." Dawson's machine gun roared, spitting tracers up the slope. Vega's rifle cracked sharp, each shot deliberate. Miller, though weak, braced against the rocks and joined in, his face twisted with pain. The warlord cowered low, shouting in his native tongue, his voice drowned by gunfire. And through it all the ghost moved. Smooth, unhurried, he unslung his rifle, dropped to one knee and found his scope in less than a breath. Harris caught the faint shift in his posture, the way the man's entire presence sharpened, became one with the weapon. The crack of his shot cut through the firefight, distinct, absolute. A figure on the ridge jerked backward, falling limp down the rocks. Another crack, another enemy folded. Then another. Each shot precise, final. Within minutes, the ridge fell silent save for the echo of the last round rolling across stone. The seals panted in the aftermath, sweat running, hearts hammering. Dawson cursed softly. "They had us pinned clean. We'd be done if not for him." But Harris noticed something no one else had. The ghost hadn't just fired to kill. He'd shifted positions between each shot, using angles the seals wouldn't have considered, anticipating where the next fighter would pop up before they did. It wasn't just marksmanship. It was predation. He knew his enemy as though he'd been living in their skin. When the silence stretched long, Harris gave the order to move. They couldn't afford another ambush in the choke point. The men rose, weary but alive, pushing forward. Yet the ghost's words replayed in Harris's mind. "I never planned on leaving." By dusk they reached the rim of the plateau. Far below, a dry riverbed cut through the earth like a scar, their route to the extraction zone beyond. Harris ordered a halt as the last light bled from the sky. The men settled with exhaustion heavy in their bones. The warlord sagged against the rocks, glaring with sullen hatred. The ghost stood apart, watching the horizon where night crept in. Harris approached, rifle slung low, his steps slow. He stopped a few feet away, studying the man whose presence weighed on every breath. "You said you don't plan on leaving," Harris said quietly. "You mean it?" The ghost didn't turn. "My war is here. It ends here." His voice was calm, certain. "But his war," he nodded at the warlord. "His war needs to end beyond these mountains. He has debts to pay that only your world can collect." Harris let the words hang. "And you? What happens when we lift off?" The ghost's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then I vanish back into the stone. And you tell your commanders I was never here." Harris stared at him, searching for cracks in the armor, for some flicker of humanity buried beneath steel and silence. But all he found was resolve, carved into a man who had become more myth than flesh. And in that moment Harris realized the truth: the sniper wasn't fighting to survive. He was fighting to disappear, to leave nothing but fear and legend behind. Back at camp, the SEALs whispered in low tones. Dawson argued they should keep their rifles pointed both ways, toward the warlord and the ghost. Vega muttered that without him they'd be corpses already. Miller, weak but clear-eyed, said nothing, only watching the sniper with a strange, unreadable expression. The warlord, however, smiled through split lips, teeth flashing. He leaned toward Harris as they passed, whispering in his cracked voice. "He will never let me leave these mountains alive. You will see. He will kill me before you reach your skybird. He has hunted me too long to stop now." Harris didn't answer. But the words planted deep, festering. He lay awake long into the night, watching the ghost sit in silence just beyond the fire's reach, motionless, eternal. And he realized with creeping certainty that the warlord might be right. Dawn cracked the horizon in bruised streaks of red and gold, painting the mountains like wounds beneath the rising sun. The SEALs moved down into the dry riverbed, each step a pounding reminder of how far they had come and how far they still had to go. Their bodies screamed for rest, but the extraction clock ticked mercilessly, and Harris knew the birds wouldn't wait. The warlord stumbled under Dawson's shove, his face swollen and bloodied, but still he carried the look of a predator biding time. Behind them, the ghost walked in silence, rifle in hand, as though he had always been there, as though the land itself had shaped him from stone. The canyon stretched wide, barren and open, a perfect killing ground. Harris's gut twisted. He scanned the ridges, eyes sharp, nerves thrumming. Too quiet. His instincts screamed louder than words could. "Eyes up," he warned. "We're not out yet." The first rocket slammed into the riverbed with a roar that shattered stone and sent fire licking into the sky. The SEALs dove for cover as shards of rock rained down. Gunfire erupted from the cliffs above, the thunder of rifles and the scream of machine guns rolling over them. Dust choked the air and the world became chaos. "Ambush! 2 o'clock high!" Vega shouted, firing back with controlled bursts. Dawson's machine gun answered, laying down walls of lead, but the enemy poured fire from 3 directions, pinning them. Miller, teeth gritted against pain, crawled to a firing position and returned fire with deadly precision. The warlord dropped to the dirt, bound hands shielding his head, laughter spilling from his throat even as bullets cracked overhead. Harris barked orders, pulling his men tighter into cover, returning fire with everything they had. But they were outnumbered, outflanked, and low on ammunition. The math was clear. This was the end unless something broke. And then the ghost moved. He rose from cover with a calm that defied the storm, rifle braced, eyes steady. His first shot cut down the RPG gunner lining up another blast. His second silenced a machine gun nest that had them pinned. He shifted seamlessly, each movement flowing into the next, like a dancer weaving death. The SEALs covered where they could, but his fire carried the weight of an army. He became a force of nature, carving holes in the ambush, forcing the enemy to falter, to scatter, to fear. Harris watched, awe tightening his chest even as he fired. This wasn't just a sniper. This was vengeance embodied, a man who had become one with the rifle, the terrain, the war itself. Minutes dragged like hours. The gunfire thinned. One by one, the attackers fell silent until the canyon echoed only with the crackle of smoke and the groans of the dying. The SEALs panted in the aftermath, skin blackened with soot, lungs raw. Dawson muttered a curse. Vega slumped against the rocks, shaking his head. Miller's hands trembled as he reloaded, though there was no one left to fire upon. And in the center of it all stood the ghost, rifle lowered, his chest heaving but his eyes calm, unbroken. The warlord lay on his side, laughter gone, replaced by silence and wide-eyed terror. He looked at the ghost as though staring into the face of death itself. The silence stretched heavy, suffocating. Harris stepped forward, chest tight. "We're close," he rasped. "Extraction's less than 2 clicks out. Move." The men dragged themselves to their feet, pushing forward, carrying the weight of exhaustion, wounds, and the bound warlord. The ghost walked behind them, silent, steps steady, rifle resting against his shoulder. The extraction zone appeared at last, a flat stretch of dirt carved into the earth, windswept and barren. In the distance, the faint thrum of helicopter rotors grew, rising over the horizon. Relief surged through the SEALs, though it was tempered by the truth gnawing at Harris. They weren't free yet. As the helicopters closed in, the warlord stiffened, his eyes darting from Harris to the ghost. Desperation cracked his voice. "He will kill me before you lift off. You know this. He cannot let me leave." The SEALs tightened their grip, dragging him forward. But the ghost halted. His voice carried across the roar of approaching rotors. "He's right." The SEALs froze. Harris turned sharply, rifle rising. "Stand down." The ghost stepped closer, eyes locked on the warlord. "For years I've hunted him. Every man I buried, every brother I lost, it all leads here. And you want to fly him away, let him rot in a cell where he'll still draw breath, still be alive. That's not justice." Dawson raised his weapon. "We're not letting you take him." The ghost's gaze slid across the SEALs, calm, steady. "You don't understand. He cannot leave these mountains alive. If he does everything I've done, all the blood, all the years, it means nothing." The warlord thrashed in his bindings, terror etched deep in his face. "Stop him. He is mad. He will kill us all." The helicopters thundered closer, whipping dust across the zone. Harris felt the moment closing like a vice, every heartbeat pounding in his skull. His men aimed at the ghost. The ghost aimed at the warlord. And Harris stood in the center, commander of a mission that was seconds from collapse. He raised his voice, hard as steel. "You saved us. You carried us here. Don't throw it away. You want vengeance? Fine. But this isn't your call. It's ours. And I won't let you decide for us." For the first time the ghost's calm cracked. His eyes flared, grief and fury warring inside. His rifle trembled, aimed steady at the warlord's chest, finger taut on the trigger. The rotors thundered above as the first bird hovered in, side door open, dust swirling. Dawson shouted over the roar. "Harris, call it." The warlord screamed curses, spit flying. The SEALs held their breath, every man locked on the trigger. And then, slowly, the ghost lowered his rifle. His eyes burned, but his hands dropped. His voice came quiet, almost broken. "Take him. But know this, the mountains remember. And one day so will he." The SEALs surged forward, dragging the warlord into the helicopter. The ghost stepped back, dust whipping around him, his figure blurring in the storm of rotors. Harris caught his eyes one last time, gray, cold, but carrying something deeper now, something cracked but alive. A silent farewell. The bird lifted, the ground shrinking below. Harris leaned out, staring down at the lone figure who stood unmoving, rifle across his back, vanishing into the haze. The warlord shouted inside the cabin, thrashing, cursing. But Harris barely heard him. His eyes stayed on the ghost, shrinking into a speck among the endless stone. When the mountains swallowed him, Harris sat back, chest heavy, heart torn between relief and unease. They had survived. The mission was complete. But the cost was etched deeper than wounds. Because some wars never end. Some men never leave. And somewhere in those silent peaks, the ghost still hunted, still waited, still carried the weight of every brother buried in the dirt. And Harris knew with a certainty that burned like truth. Though the mission was over, the story of the man who saved them was only beginning. The end.